Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Zen Leader Virtual Dojo. There's been a group of us, some of whom are here with us tonight, who have been we've just completed the first of 3 days of time together, exploring a whole diversity of expressions and applications of Zen leadership with the help of several teachers, including White La Roshi. And tonight's special talk is part of this new course we call Zen Leader Plus or Heal Plus, which was created as an opportunity for ongoing personal and professional development after completion of the Zen Leader Heal series. And we wanted to share this opportunity of listening to White La Roshi with the wider community of Institute for Zen Leadership and Chose Zen. And the theme of our course, Zen Leader Plus and Heal Plus, is exploring nature and the nature of our true nature. So White La Roshi's talk kind of builds on that and connects with that. Her talk is entitled Perma Leadership, Nature-Inspired Leadership for Personal and Collective Thriving. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to White La Roshi and thank her so much for this one of two talks, one tonight, one tomorrow night.
Thank you, Kelly, and Paul and Jasleen, who have been tirelessly putting this program together over the months. And it really represented, I called it a self-exciting circuit, a growth in the Institute where something happened that I didn't start. I wasn't the instigator. And I love that. I love that. There's a kind of naturalness to that, or nature inspiration behind that. And I welcome this opportunity to take you on a journey with me. Take you on a journey that I've been on for the last few years. And many of you know parts of this journey. You've been on it with me. You've been on your version of it. It started at the Spring Green Dojo with back in 2019. We were at an IZL program. Some of you were there. And Gordon Green Roshi was talking. He was giving a lecture one night. And he was talking about climate change. And his son Sam had inspired him to calculate his carbon footprint. And he came in with all these spreadsheet numbers of his carbon footprint and how much was going to this and how much was going to that, And he just stopped. He said, we've got to change how change happens. And that line really hit me. We've got to change how change happens. Because that led to me deeply diving into resonance, as you know, because I'm sitting there like as a physicist going, change always happens due to resonance. So how do we change the conditions of resonance? This is all running through my head. But I'm also really struck by, wow, there's something going on that needs to grab our attention as leaders. There's something going on that needs to grab our attention as a generation. As a couple of generations. It led to a workshop at Spring Green a few months later where a bunch of us got together to explore what does Zen and Zen leadership have to offer this area of climate change. We were standing around putting Post-it notes on charts and looking at all these things, but if I had to net it all down, where we landed was, yeah, there are some really important ways that Zen supports this time, that Zen is needed in this time. For starters, the experience of connection, being connected to what is going on, not ignoring it, which leads to suffering and more of it, but connecting with it. That samadhi one-withness. Connecting with nature, connecting with these relationships of one-withness that we emphasize in Zen, not as a belief, not as something you should do, as a genuine human experience. A genuine human experience. I mean, as you sit there now, I just invite you to sit in a way where your breath can drop. Some of us were just sitting right before this in the virtual dojo, which has connected our training between all programs, which has connected our training daily. And just for a moment, just take your fingers in the middle of the brow, and then on exhale, empty the mind. So do that a few times. Exhale, just let's clear out some clutter, get into that trunk and just, all right, throw out some, there it is, clear it out. And then take your ears, rotate your ears, kind of pulling them away from your scalp a little bit. Warm them up, rotate. I know it's hard with headset, isn't it, Anne? I'm sorry. You have to take your headset off temporarily. Right. All right. And now take your breath. Enter the center of your breath. Ride the breath right down. Yeah. Another breath. Go right into the center of it. Take that breath. You're right at the center of it, radiating in all directions. Deeper into the center. Take that center down. Yeah. This sense of connection is not theoretical. It's what we remember when we drop the illusion of separation. And that Zen experience we're invited into again and again. So, is that an important part of how to face into this time? Yeah. Another thing we landed on was how Zen has so many practices in efficiency. We use the example like washing our little bowls and sesshin. Many of you have had that experience where we use the tea to wash the bowls, and it's all very efficient, right? There's no extra steps here, no extra steps there. After a few days together in training, whether it's at an IZL program or if it's sesshin, we just move together like a flock of geese. We just move like we don't run into each other. We don't trip over each other's shoes walking in and out of the dojo. There's like a gracefulness that becomes so efficient, right? So that kind of efficiency, nothing extra, can become a part of what Zen could offer into this time. Knowing what enough is. We say, eat just enough. We spent last weekend in Zen Leader 2 really probing what enough looks like as we lean into our own needs so we don't take more than enough. Because when we take more than enough, we throw the system out of balance, just as we have. And so this knowing what enough is, another key way Zen can support this climate crisis that we're accelerating into. And then, of course, facing suffering. One of the things that Gordon has brought front and center in our training of how it is that we can be present for discomfort and not run away, how we can be present in a mess, even the mess that we've helped to create, and help people throughout it. So many of you right now are in the front lines of the mess, right? Because you're witnessing every day, for example, in healthcare, how the health of so many people is compromised, right? Like, what did we break a record for opioid deaths last year? Mental wellness is at risk in people who are ordinarily healthy, and it's super at risk at people who used to be on the edge. So how do we face into this suffering, take away suffering, absorb suffering, metabolize suffering? It has something to do with how we become one with, how we don't run away, how we can stand in hell and radiate heaven, how we can be in a mess without being messed up. Something like that. As I dove into this idea of changing, how change happened, and worked on resonance and writing the book Resonate, it really hit me how something we struggle with so much in this climate emergency is that the conditions for resonance to build across a society or across all of our societies around the globe are just not, they just haven't been present. They've been easy to interrupt. They've been easy to mess with. And even as I sat there in 2019 listening to Gordon calculate his carbon footprint, I'm sitting there going like, and I, of course, went home and calculated mine, and it was abysmal because I was flying all over the place then. It was horrible. Glynis Ringer, a good colleague of mine who's been deep in this Perma Leadership with me, she was also always on the road. She calculated hers. She was the only person I knew who had one larger than mine. So it was, you know, that was like not a prize we wanted to win, but it was a commitment we made to quit flying around all over. And then COVID, boom, lands and helped out that commitment quite a bit. We were all grounded. We were all grounded. So I calculated my carbon footprint again after I quit flying, and it was still rotten. It was still way more than it could be, than was healthy for the earth. And this was after we did routine, not routine things, but even somewhat extraordinary things, like putting a geothermal system into our house for heating, you know, things that represented a significant commitment. But I realized that just our lifestyle and the way we live and what we waste and how we live in the West, I'd have to go live in a hut in the woods to get down to what a carbon footprint would need to be just my personal contribution to what 7.2 billion people are adding to the earth. If I met the average, it would be hard to do that in the United States of America. So it's hard to believe that we're going to get things to add up, right? That was part of the challenge with resonance. That, you know, for big change to happen, there were 4 conditions that had to come together. There had to be this common perception of a unifying challenge. We are in this together. And you'd think if there was anything we'd feel that about, it would be climate change. But look how many decades we've messed around, mucking up the data around that. Interjecting marginal scientific opinions to compete with major scientific opinions, just to slow down that, sow those seeds of doubt. Slow down the conversation, the acceptance, the understanding. We have to be able to understand our interdependence on this. Instead, what we've seen politically around the world is kind of a blame game. Well, we won't do it because China's not doing it, or we won't do it because they're not doing it, or if we do it, it'll hurt our economy. We don't want to hurt our economy, so we want to hurt their economy, and you know, this kind of stuff. This kind of stuff. Not an interdependence feeling like, yeah, this is the work of our generation. Let's do it. Not a connected feeling like, yeah, we're in this together. We have to figure this out together. No, kind of this finger pointing. The third dimension that was needed is needed for large-scale changes. People have to know what to do. We say personal agency. They have to know what to do. For a long time, that was kind of difficult to figure out. There's getting to be more common understanding of some common things to do. But it goes way beyond, you know, reuse, recycle, right? You know, that's just like touch the tip of the surface. Having curbside recycling was a great step forward, but it's just the tip of the surface, you know. Bob, I think back to that video you made a couple years ago. I don't know if you remember that, but you were kind of documenting, you know, what is it we could do? And you were just looking at like all the mail we receive, right? You were opening your mailbox, right? This catalogs and paper and all this. How do you stop this stuff? This incredible waste, right? Or opening our tool sheds and seeing all the gas-powered vehicles, right? You know. And then finally, what's needed for big change is a way for it to add up, for our waves to add up. But resonance can sometimes have surprising effects. That's one of the things that really hit me as I was writing about resonance. And what has hit me since is that somehow we have to face, no, I won't say we have to. I say we are facing into this time with everything we've got. The suffering that's being caused by it, what we can do to improve it, what we can do to stem the tide, what we can do to fix systems that are falling apart, or plug holes in the dike as it leaks. And yet somehow there is something still stewing, still cooking about how to get real resonance around the call to leadership in this. Glynis was chewing on this too. You know, she took a bio-leadership fellowship, and she was really hit by the principles of permaculture that were taught in that. And the principles of permaculture start with 3 basic ethics. You probably know them. Care for people, care for the planet. And then the third one goes by different monikers, but sometimes it's care for our shared future. Sometimes it's fair share. Sometimes I just translate it as know what enough is. Right? Know what enough is. But these are, in one sense, sort of common sense principles. Why would we want to devise a system that doesn't care for people, care for the planet, and know what enough is? You know? Well, it's because we don't know what enough is. Or we don't care for people, we care for ourselves. Or we don't care for the planet because we have a habit of just using things, because we feel separate from them. So it always comes back to this illusion of separation. And the way we have grown up habitually, not only individually, but collectively in our cultures, to exploit, to use one another, to use people, to use resources. We call them resources, right? Human resources, natural resources. They are resources. So these common sense principles, care for the planet, care for people, care for our shared future, they're revolutionary if business actually started developing this way. They would be revolutionary if this is how leaders thought, if this is how healthcare thought, if this is how government thought. So last year, we, having chewed on this a long time, decided to pull together a group of people to learn more about how nature could inspire leadership to start feeling this. Start feeling these ethics, not as thou shalts, but as a felt sense. Because that's a big world of difference right there. If we feel them as connected human beings versus if we feel them as rules on a wall or something somebody's telling us to do. And we learned, we gave people some immersion experiences into different traditions, Indigenous traditions, Zen traditions, you know, to give them an experience of connectedness. To learn about how leadership might look if leaders were starting from a connected place, one with. And all kinds of things started popping. I think including the theme for Zeal Plus, Heal Plus, you know, the theme for this weekend. All kind of things started popping around how nature could inspire us. We used it as a theme for our masterclass last year. You'll see this year we're going to return to it again 1 year later with a lot more meat on the bones. And along the way, I dove into deeper into some Indigenous wisdom. I was doing some of these immersions that Glynis was showing us, which put Zen in a much bigger context for me. You know, Zen is a tradition, it's like 1,500 years old. But I was listening to traditions that were 10,000 years old. And it blew me away. It blew me away. I want to share with you, you know, it's just a part of a video from Malarian Merkurliev an Indigenous elder who is speaking out about, he's trying to do his best to build resonance from a wisdom he knows to be true, that's been passed down through his 10,000-year-old culture. And I felt him speaking from a 10,000-year-old culture to a 1,500-year culture that's been in a 2,500-year-old Western culture that never knew some of the things he talks about. We've never lived like we knew it. A culture that honors the sacred feminine, speaking to a culture that never has. A culture that speaks about remembering what it is to be a connected human being, to a culture that had no idea what that meant. So I am going to change my audio setting here for a moment so I can show this video. That is going to do it. And tell me if this is coming through for you. Are you seeing it? Okay. I'm going to ask you to just listen and feel into this person, become this person. As you hear any phrase or anything that grabs you, just jot it down, because I'm going to ask you afterwards to share in the chat what hit you. We won't have time to do a whole Electio Divina like we did with Rebecca this afternoon, but I'm going to ask you to just jot down what hits you. All right? So just breathe with this and feel into this human being.
I was born and raised out in the middle of the Bering Sea on one of a group of 5 islands. The group is called the Priblof Island. The island that I grew up on, which was the largest island, is called St. Paul Island. And when I grew up, we had about 450 people in the island. It was only 12 miles long and 5 miles wide. And when I was a child, I think we had about 1.8 northern fur seals, all congregated around the shoreline of the island, and 2.5 million seabirds, and 1,000 reindeer and 500 Aleut people. That's the island I grew up on. So I would wake up in the morning listening to the seals, and during the day we'd probably smell them because they're just thick around the island, and go to bed at night listening to the sound of the birds. And my generation, and so my people have been out there for 10,000 years. But we say, of course, like everybody else, since time immemorial, our people have been out there probably far longer than 10,000, because a lot of the areas that we used to occupy are now submerged underwater. And we have stories about how our people, came across and migrated from Egypt all the way through Mongolia, up through Siberia, and across on boats. And of course, the anthropologists, say that we came across the Bering Land Bridge, but they never thought to ask us what are our origin stories. And so 10,000 years is like 6,000 years before the height of the pyramid cultures. And we're a highly evolved spiritual culture. And we had the most densely occupied linear mile of shoreline than any place in North America. That shows how sophisticated our culture was to be able to support that density along the shorelines in Alaska, in a place that is very difficult to eke out a living, but our people were such masters of the ocean, and so profoundly spiritual beyond. And I think at that time, probably most groups in the world were that spiritual. And we're lucky that we've had a lot of the information passed along from generation to generation in terms of what that spirituality was all about. And it was basically profound connection with all of creation, because this is central to how we know things. And it characterizes more of our profound connection with all of creation. When we talk about the womb in the center of the universe, there's a real physical world purpose for that too. And it's also very spiritual. I mean, our elders say you need 2 wings to fly, one for physical, one for spiritual. You got to have both. You can't fly without one or the other. We are given our physical for a purpose, and we're given the spiritual. So one day I was 16 years old, and I was kind of, lamenting the fact that our people have lost our ways to be able to create these incredibly powerful spiritual masks, right? I would see them in the Smithsonian and in Europe, in the Louvre, in France, and we have all these books, pictures of these Aleut masks, Unangan masks. And I was lamenting about, this way is gone. We don't see anybody making these kind of masks. I don't know how to make these kind of masks. So I decided I'm going to go to the oldest man in the village on St. Paul Island, 88 years old, Aggie, Pokoinik, we call him Pokoinik Aggie, because his grandfather was the last shaman on St. Paul. So I went to him and I was telling about how we've lost this way. And he says, no, it's not been lost. I'm paraphrasing, but what he said was, go out to the ocean, next to the ocean, on the beach, clear your mind, center yourself, set your intention, and wait. Okay, now that sounds pretty simple on the surface, but spiritually what that means, and I knew intuitively at that time what it meant. Okay, clear your mind means no words. Your mind is quiet, okay? And center yourself is literally the centering within my own being, which is me being present here now in this moment, okay? And set your intention and wait. On the surface seems pretty simple, but what it really means is, can you trust and have faith and know that the answer will come with every cell of your body? Not your mind, because the mind is quiet. Can your whole being trust to the degree that the answer will come? Not one shred of doubt. This is what they mean by faith can move mountains. It's not a faith that anybody understands, because we don't have role models for it anymore. How do you embody faith? How do I trust implicitly with no shred of doubt in my body? So I'm sitting there and doing what he instructs. And I wait, and within a couple of hours in that state, a little black dot appears in my mind's eye. And it opens up, and out of it poured like 100 different masks, all different, and in a matter of seconds. And I'm thinking, I'm not an artist, I've never done artwork. And here, all these masks come, and I know it doesn't come from my experience. Where is it coming from? So I go back and I tell Aggie about this, and he goes, good boy. And basically what he said was, I tapped into the womb at the center of the universe. He said, this is where we get our information, our ceremonies, our guidance, our direction comes from that place. And that when I got that put new meaning to the statement that all things are birthed of woman. All creativity and all creation. That I touched into what might be called the sacred feminine. And that was profound for me, changed my life just to see that. And this is also why women were considered sacred. Now, this is a very important point, especially today. Most people, most men and women, and even many spiritual leaders have forgotten why women were considered sacred. Because, like a hologram inside of their bodies, is the direct an exact sacred condition as the womb in the center of the universe that is physically manifested in their womb. Now, Western medicine would say, well, we can take the egg and the sperm outside of the womb, and we can, start life, but it can never grow into a human being. And the scientists can't understand why. Well, from a traditional way, we understand there is a sacred vibrational field inside of the woman that we have forgotten to honor. That is the place of all the things born, that nothing new can be birthed without woman. And what women have done before time began was they would take that sacred vibration and move it outside in ceremonial space to create the womb on the outside vibrationally, so that something new can be birthed in this world. Okay? And we've forgotten that point. And it's really, really important now. The men, as we have to be the new spiritual warrior, is the one that protects the sacred space of women so they can do their work. Because if we're looking for change in this world, from a spiritual standpoint and from a physical standpoint, it will never happen until we restore that place, until we help women do that. Nothing new will be created. And so if we don't do it, we as a human species, I believe, we're done for.
So let me just encourage you to write in the chat anything that landed for you, anything that hit you, anything that struck you, that resonated. Connection is how we know things, yes. This is a different, in our Zen tradition, we call this kan. Or it sometimes translates as intuition. Intuition. But it's not intuition like the way we sometimes treat it in the West, as that kind of flaky, sloppy thought. It's not logical. It's a knowingness that comes from two hands part of one system, being one with. A knowingness that is intrinsic to connection, yes. Set your intention and wait. And you notice he said, wait, I waited a couple hours. How many of you would have waited a couple of hours for insight? How often do you wait a couple hours for insight to arrive from the womb at the center of the universe? Right? How often do we even feel we have a couple of hours? Right? Your intention and wait is not lost. This wisdom is not lost. It's not lost in us. It is not lost in our collection. This is a really important point, because what he's pointing toward is a remembering. And why I said it, one reason it really hit me was that it reminded me that we used to know this. I've often thought, in our Zen training, we aren't usually considered part of the popular culture. I bet you've noticed that, right? We don't, when we try to talk about Zen leadership in companies or in healthcare systems, sometimes people are afraid of that Zen word, because is that like a religion? Are we going to talk about religion in the workplace? Oh, heaven forbid that we should do that, right? Because we've got this unease. And we want to say, this is about being human. This isn't about committing to some kind of, belief system. It's about remembering what it is to be a connected human being, which we all used to do. When you think about how old humanity is, if we assume, as Larry Merkurlioff would guide us, that 10,000 years ago, people were pretty spiritual. They were connected to the land because that's how they lived, that's how they survived. He knew how to go fishing in the Bering Sea because he could hear the fish. He could feel the fish in his own body. He was connected at that level. That's a sensitivity, a tuning into, a resonance that I don't know a fisher today who has that. Maybe some do. I sure don't. I'm not really a fisher, but that's a level of sensitivity that is profound, right? How do we embody faith? So I love that point too, Cynthia, that we think of faith in the West, we put it up in our head, right? It was a belief system. We went and then we used it to organize a hierarchical society, right? Even a religion as radical as Christianity was, in the words of someone like Jesus Christ, became a way to put down rebels later on, right? Right? The mystical traditions of Christianity got wiped out in favor of having experts tell you what to think, right? How do we get both wings to fly again? No one asks us about our stories. Yeah. So you think about what we've done to Indigenous cultures in this country, in North America generally. I think Canada was better than us, but not by much, in terms of the suppression of Indigenous cultures. So we wipe out this knowing because we want to use the land. We want the land. So we wipe out the people. Take the land. But we don't have the reciprocal relationship with the land that someone like Mercurieff speaks of. That knowing, that connection, that take just enough. We don't have that sense of stewardship with the land. We have a sense of take as much as you can get. In the West, land became something you fought over, conquered, tore back and forth from each other, used as much as you could have, killed for. That's how we've used land in the West. Not just North America, but Western culture. And Mercurieff, interestingly, has a story around that too, as well, around how wisdom was shared among 4 tribes. Maybe I'll share that more tomorrow, but I'm realizing I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep rolling here. So what I want to say one other thing about the sacred feminine, because this is not an anti-man message at all. I want to be clear about that. We all embody and we all have both masculine and feminine energy as human beings. What has happened often in the West, though, is we cut off from the feminine because it has not been on a level playing field, really, until, arguably, my generation. Maybe you could say the generation before me, but maybe not. And even my generation asked the women in Afghanistan how equal playing field they're on. So this power of woman was kind of frightening to a lot of men. and it wasn't as physically powerful as the muscular man who could, be the fire-driven warrior, right, and fight for the land. So it was easy to oppress. But interesting, I've never heard before hearing Mercurieff's talk and other things I've read there, read in this culture. I've never heard before of what we lost in that. And we know anytime we cut off from a part of ourself, there's a great loss. But I've never quite put it in a new context for me. And then, as Christy reminds us, it's not really lost. It's there for our remembering. So we wanted to remember this. We wanted to remember this, and this is again where I feel our Zen has so much to offer the West, because we didn't grow up this way. In fact, you know, one of the things we were talking about just this week is in our culture, we've been really traumatized by millennia of fighting over land. And the wars result from that. You know, this has really been studied in much more depth since the Vietnam War, and what post-traumatic stress syndrome is and what it does and how people dissociate from suffering. But truthfully, it didn't start in Vietnam, for goodness sake. The fallout of war has been a story of Western culture. And that trauma passed through, passed through, passed through, passed through, passed through. So I would submit Zen training is the medicine strong enough to treat even our level of dissociation. It takes medicine that strong. So we, in the PermaLeadership realm, saw these principles of permaculture, how care for the planet, care for people, and care for our shared future, knowing what enough is, could be revolutionary. We wanted to see how would this really work in like a leadership program. If leaders were immersed in a sense of connection, could they be inspired by nature to a different kind of leading? Could this be something that we could actually bring into companies and governments and organizations and healthcare and all kinds of places to get people operating from a different place of connectedness? And we brought a couple dozen people through an initial cycle to learn whether these immersions were working for them, you know. If they delved into nature, could they feel something of its connection? If they had kind of a Zen immersion, could they get a taste, even a taste of samadhi? And what came out of it was a refinement of like a cycle just like nature itself. A sense of a seasonal kind of cycle that could actually help bring this new into the world, birth something new into the world. And it was a 4-stage model that started from the foundation of connect and remember. Connect and remember what it is to be a connected human being again, in every cell of your body. And from there, reimagine the future you want. And from there, let it change you. Does this sound like Zen leadership? Flip 7. Become that future. And from there, you're attuned in this resonant sense to co-create moment by moment and realize pulling that future through your own being. This cycle. With what we know is that without the genuine sense of connection, it's sustainability efforts. It's Band-Aids, it's greenwashing. It's completely not up to the task. With this sense of connection, something new could come into the world. And it hit me that it's this leap in consciousness, because this is a real leap in consciousness, to get people experiencing, remembering what it is to be a connected human being. And this cycle could apply as readily to your personal journey and something a future you're trying to realize as it could to a healthcare system or a municipal government or a Fortune 500 company trying to redo their strategy or launch a new business model. How could they make that model something that actually allows people and the planet to thrive? They'd follow this cycle. They'd follow this cycle. So it struck me, having been in leadership development for 25 years, that this is going to be the next blueprint, could be the next blueprint for leadership development. When I sort of cut my teeth in the field, globalization was the thing. Dennis knows this well. Companies were globalizing, and there was a whole leap in consciousness needed to get them understanding how to work in a messy matrix, how to optimize rather than maximize, how to work with paradox, how to develop some emotional intelligence so they would actually look at multiple points of view or have a chance of becoming multiculturally competent. The era of globalization took leaders on a journey where they had to evolve their consciousness. But that level is not enough for what we face now. What we face now is going to take another leap. And the leap called for now is this remembering what it is to be a connected human being, once again. So it's this putting, for me, Zen leadership in the context of the most pressing work of our time. And our Zen training at the heart of that connectedness that allows people to make this leap. It also then adds in design principles in tune with nature. You know, we have long expressed Zen leadership in terms of leading according to the way or leading the way as a sense of a larger way, a natural way, a way of nature where we can accord larger forces and resonate with them. And in that resonance, we create systems that are more enduring, more sustainable, more natural. We become a part of nature, not apart from it. So let me just share a couple more slides with you of how this might look. And this is what we'll be growing upon, building upon as we go into masterclass. So the essence of PermaLeadership is this cycle that starts from connecting and remembering, building embodied, connected leaders who are capable of this intuition, this knowingness. This is how we know things. And then applying it to a matter at hand, which could be some pressing issue in your own life. It could be a purpose for a team. It could be a new ESG strategy. It could be a new business model. It could be a future for our municipality. It could be a new healthcare system. Shift and reimagine what future you actually want to create. Because it really comes out of the whole positive psychology movement and intentional change theory that we want to focus our energy on what we want, not on what we don't want. We want to be able to tune and hone our energy on where we want to go. So we have to be able to imagine it. And leaders who are sensitive are in some ways, you could almost think of them as like the poets, you know, poets of sensing in the zeitgeist when something's ready to happen. So they can reimagine it. And there's some very concrete shifts that we can work with that help, the shifts that represent trends or directions the world is kind of moving, that help people reimagine this future they want to create. And then energize and inspire, working with energy. This was one of our real themes today of how to work with energy, but this is to let it change you. How to become, in that flip 7 kind of a way, the future you want to bring into the present, because that's where you exist, in the present. So how you might let it change you in terms of wellness practices where you have energy, hara-centeredness where you can withstand the headwinds of coming up against habitual systems that no longer work, and energy patterns that help you use the right energy at the right time, energy of become the other so you can inspire collective wisdom, collective knowingness. So there's a kind of bringing people along here. So this energizing and inspiring people is really tuning the instruments so that we can, in the moment by moment, co-create with the forces that are and make real that future. We're pulling it into the present through ourselves. So this cycle is becoming a model for leadership programs, a model for, and this is something we're starting to talk with companies about. This is something that we want to develop more leaders and teachers of. And each of these stages itself kind of, you can fractal it out to a little bit more detail in terms of what each one means. For example, connect and remember. This is where we might take people into nature or give people a Zen immersion so that they start to have this sense of connection. Shift and reimagine, some of these specific shifts or forces that are shaping the future, applying it to a particular matter at hand, I call it. To reimagine, flip around how that might look. So reimagine the future we want and what will be required to get there. And then energize and inspire, building the stamina, the energy, the grit to stand in where you are and bring others along. Hit that note, play that note that is common in the human being that people remember with you. Remember who they are. And then how we can build energy for personal and collective action to let it change us. And then finally, letting the principles of permaculture, the design principles, guide us in how we actually do things. How is it we obtain a yield without waste? Using renewables, maybe partnering with other groups that can use what we can't use or getting from them what they can't use. How it is that we can build from slow, small solutions into something where we can, it's adaptive, where we're finding in the margins between things a great place of fertile innovation. These are the things we're playing with and building into programs that will become offerings, including through the Institute. So, I think what I want to say is that this cycle is still evolving. This is all very soft, mushy clay that's still, maybe it's still coming off of our mushy clay, forming a new baby, right? It's not cast in concrete yet. But there's something here that has really lit me up and gives a sense of focus in terms of a way to take a Western, dissociated, traumatized culture back to remembering something that's deeper and older in us. Not an exceptional fringe kind of thing, only for the hardy meditators, but bringing people deeper home into something they know to be true, that we can resprout the two wings that we need to fly. So let me pause for this evening and just ask if I think we'll have a chance in Zeo Plus to reflect on some of this, how it settles in tomorrow. But not all of you are in Zeo Plus, or maybe there's a burning question top of mind you want to ask. Anything that you want to ask or write in the chat, feel free.
Right, Roshi, you didn't talk about this explicitly, but the process the man in the video describes of clear your mind, set your intention, and wait reminded me a lot of koan training or that kind of process, maybe Khufu, but it's a very, to me, it's a, I don't know, it sounded familiar to me. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
That's right. It's so hard for Larry Merkurlioff to try to explain the depth of where he's talking about in a Western audience. And when I read interviews and watch videos with him, he's often trying to say, it's hard, it sounds simple, but it's not so simple. He's trying to say there's some depth to this because it's exactly as Gobi Roshi says, it's pure Zen. Clear your mind, no words. Well, you can't do that with your mind alone. Have you ever tried? You're going to have to really refine the body to get the mind that clear. So center yourself, He didn't talk about hara, but that's been the method that has been passed to us. Slow down your breathing. It slows down the rate at which thought develops. So there's this deep sense of how it is you can cultivate this intuition, this I'll call it knowing of connectedness or wisdom of connectedness is it feels to me as I listen to him very deep in and present in his culture. And it is exactly what we cultivate in koan training or in Zen training generally. And I love your question, and I don't know an answer. Might there be a feminine character? Maureen, come in with your answer. Or a historical character who embodies a kind of leadership, feminine energy into the world. Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
Well, what comes to mind is the Bible's the book of wisdom. And they speak of wisdom, and they refer to wisdom as she.
As she, yeah.
It's a very, very powerful, some very powerful imagery.
Yeah.
Not a character, but yeah.
Yeah, we have archetypes, you know, in our cultures, right? And we have archetypes, you know, that even the bodhisattva of compassion, that as an archetype is often portrayed in the feminine form. But it's historical character. Let me sit with that one. I invite you as well. Parvati, feminine form of Shiva, and there's the masculine form. So again, different cultures will have different archetypes, right? Different models. But you know, in Western culture, again, the feminine has been generally suppressed. So it's not, you know, and it's not just Western culture. I mean, as Rebecca Ryan Roshi was talking about earlier today, she was so vexed that she looked through the whole, you know, all the lineage, you know, of 28 teachers in India, followed by 28 in China, followed by 28 in Japan, and the whole entire lineage, and there's not a woman to be seen, you know, because, right, these were all the abbots, you know, we're all the men. So where were the women? But, you know, it just hasn't, East and West, this is why it was so refreshing to me to hear from a culture 10,000 years old, rather than these upstarts that are just a few thousand, you know. Thank you so much. Did this make sense to you? Did this make sense? Yeah? So the founders of nun communities. Yeah, Maureen, there's some great stories. I mean, of the Sisters of St. Mary, the Hidden Lamp. I mean, there's some great stories of this, right? But they're stories of the 25 centuries of awakened women. I mean, so we have to resurrect some of those stories, I guess. Yeah.
This was so great, White La Roshi. Like, it feels so of the moment, and I don't know, it feels like you summarized everything we need to be doing. My only feedback is that I wanted to spend more time reading your slides, and some of the font was too small for me to read them, so
I know.
I want time to relish in it a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you know, these slides are still a work in progress, but when they're ready, there's going to be a PermaLeadership website, and I'll send you the link to it so you can take your time with it. And we'll also obviously be bringing this more into our IZL website over time as well. So it won't be a mystery, but it's not quite ready to share yet. You know, it's still, the font's way too small.
It felt kind of like a CDC talk where it's
That's right. Well, the main words I would ask you there are connect and remember, shift and reimagine, energize and inspire, create and realize. That's what you need to remember. Those are the biggies.
I'm joking with you, but so many amazing nuggets there. I really mean it. I mean, this is really exciting.
Well, thank you so much. And let's get some rest tonight. We're going to come at it again tomorrow night from a little different angle, but you'll see some similar themes. Nature as healer, as teacher, and as mirror. What we can learn from nature to inform this process. So, okay. Thank you all. Have some rest tonight, and we'll pick it up in the morning.